proper screen. Are you seeing the full slides? Thank you. Still a bit of a quandary for me is to make sure that I'm showing the full slides as opposed to the viewer slides. So we'll go ahead and get started here. I believe we're on time. Today I'm going to be talking about clinical data management, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, and just really give a quick overview of some of the information that I think that clinical research professionals should at least be aware of. As you know, technology is changing every day on us, and we need to make sure that we are at least up to date with some of the terminology and some of the things that are changing on a daily basis for us. So again, thank you for joining us for today's clinical research professional training series. Today is going to be clinical data management, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, an overview. Today's objectives, in short, are going to be to compare data integrity and data quality. While they're very similar in nature, there is some difference. To examine some of the new data technologies and their possible application to clinical research, and to identify new clinical study designs using these new data technologies as they may affect us as we move forward. So when we talk about data management, what exactly are we talking about? From this slide here, you can see that there are a lot of different areas that are affected by data management. Data warehousing, you sometimes hear about accessing your data warehouse to query to see if you have the population in order to conduct a clinical research study. The data integration, how are they combined together? Data security is another very large part of data management, data sharing. And as you can see here, there are a lot of different areas that are affected by the data that we collect on a daily basis. So when we're talking about data integrity and data quality, are they actually the same? And they're not. If we follow the Alcoa C, that is talking about our data integrity. And we talked about this last month when we discussed Alcoa C. Data integrity is not the same as data quality. Data integrity indicates that the data is credible and reliable. Using Alcoa C, we talked about attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, and complete. Where data quality is an indication that the data has been collected and managed correctly. Some of the principles of data quality are accuracy, completeness, consistency, timeliness, validity, and uniqueness. Now, a lot of those terms may sound as if they are the same, which can be a little bit confusing to those of us who are not deeply into data. So to review, here are some of the principles of the data integrity, the Alcoa C, that is recommended by the FDA to be used in all documentation. We talked about last month: attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, and complete. So similar, accurate, free from error. So if we look at data quality, you see a lot of the same terms. However, they're a little bit different in their application. So here, accurate is meaning that there are no data errors. Data is clean. So this is an indication that similar terms are being used, that you don't have typos and things like that. Completeness. Are there missing data points? Are there duplications that a file has been uploaded twice? Consistency, same values across the system. This is extremely important in the way that questions are asked, in the sense that if you've heard before, um, the difference between asking for a person's age versus their date of birth, those two questions can elicit different answers um, if the date of birth is then calculating what their actual age is in years, month, and days. Using data dictionaries and provenance as to where the information came from, and that you can follow it back to its original source. Timeliness. This is something that I don't think that as coordinators we deal with a lot, but it indicates that it is readily available and accessible, that it isn't saved in an unreachable location that we cannot access that information anymore. And then probably the most important is the validity. Does it accurately measure what it was intended to measure? This is probably one of the biggest differences between data integrity and data quality. And that all comes down to the question that was asked. So an example would be information was recorded, but you find out later that the equipment was not calibrated correctly. You recorded all of the data. There is good in data integrity, but the data quality is not accurately reflecting what was to be measured. It's invalid. So these are some of the very small nuances between data integrity and data quality. Data quality really is looking more at the management of the data. Data integrity is really what the clinical coordinator addresses in making sure that they have properly recorded the occurrences and documented them well. Data quality then looks at the overall project as to how the data elements are stored and retrieved, and that the information is indeed valid. So why do we even talk about data? Here we are, clinical research, and we're talking about data, not the patients. And the reason is that the data is the ultimate ends of all of our clinical research. It is the data that will then show us whether or not the proposed treatment or therapies, etc., are indeed valid. Clinical research needs have changed over time. I know that for me, in just the last 10 to 12 years, there have been a lot of changes. More is being requested of research, and we've seen that recently during the COVID-19 pandemic. There are needs to reduce the cost of the clinical trials, to increase there's an increase in the demand for faster results. Recruitment of sufficient numbers of participants in equitable fashion. It's not enough just to recruit the number of participants, but you want a good representation of society in what you are reporting. This is how some of the health disparities have been, if not overlooked, but just kind of pushed to the side. And I have my 20 patients, but is it a fair representation of the population at large? Increased precision of diagnostic abilities. We have so many new technologies, such as the genomic sequencing, that are affecting our clinical research trials. And there is a transition for the patient-centric trials rather than the trial-centric. And we have seen this most recently in the pandemic, in that patients are no longer able to get to the clinics. So technology has had a huge impact on data management and quality as to how we go about collecting our data, acquiring our data, validating it, storing it, protecting it. making sure that it's reliable and repeatable. And technology has really been exponential in the last several years as far as I'm concerned. Um, Here you see a representation of just one piece of data technology, and that is data storage. If you look here, data storage, when I first started school back in the late 70s, early 80s, this card, you'll see it in a red border down to the bottom in the middle. The data card was actually how someone went about storing their data. And if you look in the upper right-hand corner, that box of data cards, I can remember being on campus towards the end of a quarter at that time, and all of these cards being all over the place near the data center as different individuals worked on storing their data and rerunning their data. Today, approximately 40 years later, if you look to the far left, we now store data on a single USB drive that can fit on the tip of your fingertip. These are the types of data, exponential data technologies that we are now dealing with, of just moving forward due to technology. One of the things that technology is bringing to the clinical research is the sensors and wearables. But this then poses some of the problems of how do you collect this particular data? Some of the pros in using sensors and wearables, you have data collected directly from the subject, which is ideal. It supports the decentralized trials where the patient does not have to come into the research site as often or at all. Delayed data is collected in a real-time fashion, allowing for sometimes possible new data points to be collected that previously were not obtainable. And it can provide additional layers of safety oversight. If they are wearing a device or a wearable sensor, what have you, it can then have alerts that you might not know about. A previous study that I worked on using continuous glucose monitors in children would alert you to at times when they might have low sugar, low levels that you were unaware of. A lot of times parents often feared that, and we found that by putting the continuous glucose monitors on the child and looking at a continuous a continuum of their data indicated where they were having their low levels, and that there were things that they could be taught to do, such as having a granola bar before bedtime, preventing low sugars during the night. Uh, those are some of the cons, or they do generate a high volume of data. Because this is continuing monitoring, not just the specific data points. How do you handle that? Data security is probably one of the biggest issues. You hear about it in the news every day about someone hacking a system. Well, they can also hack the transmissions of these wearables or sensors, and this is a concern. Um, and there was a study that, well, not a study, but uh, a device that was pulled from the market because they found that people were able to hack into that sensor and change settings for those individuals. Now, why they would do that, I'm not exactly sure, but they found that they could. And how do you document events? So if your data shows all of a sudden uh, an increase in respiration rate, what happened during that time? If they're keeping a diary as to the events of the day, you can correlate those. But again, it means documenting by the patient of what they were doing at those time points. And then, of course, there's the ever malfunctioning of the equipment. Um, it can lose its contact, so you have missed data points. Well, what happened during those times? Is this odd point due to the device or was the patient having some type of an event? So those are some of the things that have to be worked around and thought about prior to starting those types of studies. And then artificial intelligence. So I think that everybody has heard this word in the news. It's talked about a lot. As a coordinator, when I first started hearing it, I was like, well, what exactly is it? And how is that going to affect me? But we actually find it in our world much more than we ever thought. So I'm going to take a few moments to kind of go through some of the different forms of artificial intelligence. Um, and this is not something that you need to know about in the sense that you are going to use it every day as a clinical coordinator or professional. But these are things to be aware of and to start utilizing and thinking about in your everyday settings. So, chatbots are usually one of the simplest ones. They can provide a number of outstanding data queries or even protocol deviations. So you would have a device that you would, much like you would do to Siri or Alexa, and say it's set up around a given study, and you would say, you know, provide me with the number of outstanding data queries uh, at all of the sites, or how many protocol deviations has the study had in the last 6 months. And the computer or machine, as they tend to term it, would go ahead and calculate that by looking at the data that is available to them. Um, the robotic process automation, which is often referred to as RPA, our famous acronyms that we love so much. A Roomba is nothing more than a robotic process automation. That device has been programmed to sweep until it hits a barrier, and then program to turn and head in different directions. Um, a possible application for clinical would be to program the device to download answers to the queries directly from the electronic, not the EDC, the EHR is what I meant to say, from the hospital record. It could also possibly retrieve files with specific inclusion or exclusions. You could basically program it to alert you to all of those files of patients that have certain profiles. You could then, at that point, take them and possibly then recruit from that listing. Again, these are very simple, whether specifically programmed utilizing computer devices. Some more advanced artificial intelligence, some that are actually currently in use, the natural language processing or NLP. Um, some examples of that in the world today are Siri by Apple or Alexis from Amazon, and that is where they are actually processing human language or text to extract specific information. This can either be text to voice or voice to text. This was also, I believe, several years ago, there was the introduction of a program called Dragon, where you could speak into a device and it would actually type. Our data captioning right now uses such artificial intelligence. That is why sometimes if you are in a specific field, sometimes that captioning is not correct because you're using a term that it is not familiar with. Um, some of the other clinical applications that could be used would be to extract adverse events from narratives in the electronic record by the physicians. In the past, this has always posed a problem in that a physician will have a short um, examination or report something, but they put it in text in order to make it um, clear and descriptive. computer can't pick up on all of that, but they are teaching it how to look for certain terms and to pull those in. Automate data extraction from the EDC. That it's all from the EHR is what I meant. It automatically, as it sees some of these concept terms, it pulls that out, indicating, the number of times certain events occur. It can also support compliance and regulatory systems in the way that it is programmed to view the electronic records and to pull information out and to look for trends and things like that. I really apologize about EDC. Sometimes you have so many acronyms that they tend to blur in your head. One of the more prominent artificial intelligence that is truly what most of society is kind of leaning towards now is the machine learning. And this is really what most people think of when they're thinking about artificial intelligence. Machine learning is the ability to make predictions or decisions learned from the existing data and adapting the machine's response. Spell check is probably one of the simplest forms of machine learning and can be very aggravating at times. When it thinks about you want to spell this word, well, sometimes that's not actually what you want, or where it makes self-corrections, capitalizes a word, or keeps capitalizing it when you don't want it capitalized. That's my frustration. And there are two types of machine learning that you can have. You can have supervised and unsupervised. And what those indicate is the supervised is where the machine is fed specific data, and it actually learns through the human experience. If this, then this happens. If this, or as other questions, here's a question and here's the answer. Well, here's another question and here's the other answer. And it keeps working on that until the machine learns what is expected. This is an example of when the computer can tell you whether data is in the range that you want it to be or if it's out of range. So for instance, a lab value, you put it into, in this instance, I am correct, the EDC, and it pops up that this is it's out of range. And you either have to override it or look to see if you have, in this instance, made a typo and maybe transverse the numerical values. Unsupervised, this is a little more sci-fi in my mind, and this is where it is only fed data with no interpretations, that the machine is actually learning through, I guess, quote, observations, that it sees the repeated patterns and it starts looking for those patterns. And it can then make predictions. Or one of the examples that I saw noted was being able to classify um, radiology images as being either with the disease or without a disease, probably more prominently if it's normal or non-normal. And I know that there is a lot of studies currently within radiology where they are using artificial intelligence or machine learning to help with classifying radiological MRI reports. For example, as three different radiologists can look at the same report and kind of come up with a little bit different answer. And so this is then kind of giving a one-time answer as opposed to three different opinions. And these are all fascinating technologies that will affect the way that we conduct our studies. It will affect the way that data is captured and reported. And so these are things that as clinical research coordinators, we need to be aware of as they start filtering into what it is we do on a daily basis. I know that with the COVID-19, a lot of you may have been dealing with more data that is centered around the sensors and the wearables. And how do you secure it? Who is allowed access to it? How is it managed? Um, and these are things that really need to be thought about ahead of time before you start these new types of studies. I also want to talk then just briefly about some of these changes that are coming to our traditional study designs. You've heard a lot about decentralized clinical trials. And what exactly does that incorporate? There's adaptive study designs, synthetic arms to study designs, multiple investigational products where they have different types of scenarios where you may have multiple products being tested for one indication. Basket is one where you have only one uh, intellectual property or investigative product for multiple decision or indications. And then a platform is something that's kind of a mixture. So let's talk a little bit about what you may be seeing as we start using more and more of these um, artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies. So the decentralized clinical trial that many of you may have already encountered due to COVID is where that are patient-centric. And that is where the patient is no longer required to come to the clinical site at all or as often. Um, and this has been very helpful, obviously, during COVID, as we were still able to collect data without the patients coming to the research site. Um, we using sensors and wearables, very little is collected from the electronic medical record, um, and that is always helpful. Uh, very little, or there is less dependence on the electronic medical record when you're using some of these new technologies. We, as coordinators, are no longer going through lengthy uh, medical records looking for the answers to the specific queries that we need to capture for our data. Um, Data is often collected straight from the patient through these sensors and devices and wearables. So again, there's less, it's more direct and less chances for individuals to make typos or make errors. Um, However, you have data collected by untrained clinical staff. If you are utilizing home nurses or local mini clinics to collect some of this data, sometimes you have a variability that introduced there that you actually have to plan for. And some of the monitoring abilities is different. You cannot monitor, whether or not the patient reported things accurately or whether or not it's difficult to monitor how well the device was actually reading. So in decentralized trials, we are relying on those technologies to be error-free. Sensors are responding accurately, and we know that that isn't always the case. So again, decentralized trials bring with them a lot of benefits, but there are also those areas what we have to plan for and think about ahead of time, planning for those quality studies in advance. Another type of study design that we are seeing more of are the adaptive study designs. And this is where we are actually combining some of the study phases. I've actually seen it with some of the gene therapy trials, where information from the initial phase of the efficacy and the PKs, that information is used to then design how we are going to carry out the phases 2 and 3. The individuals are kept the same and they just go from one to a next, like a rollover study. Information collected in the initial phase is then used to design the protocols of the second phase. It's very similar to using branching logic in databases. So if this happens, then this is what we're going to do. Or if this happens, then we'll go in this direction. It does require extensive pre-planning for how you're going to adopt, really looking at your sample sizes and things like that. It can change the ratio of patients in the different arms. And it can also, I've seen some where if certain things are found in the first part, the phase 1 and 2, that it totally stops, the second and third phase as being, they can already see that they're not going to be able to prove what they want, that it's not going to be a valid study. So they just stop it right at that point. These are a little bit less used currently, but again, these are some of the types of studies that are being used in some of the rare diseases, such as the gene therapies and things like that. I alluded to earlier on a little bit about these multiple investigational product type studies, the umbrella, the basket, and the platform. And really what they're doing is they're utilizing some of this artificial intelligence to look at the results kind of within the computer and comparing. So in an umbrella study would be where you had multiple investigational products that are being applied to one indication. This sometimes is what is being used in what they call precision medicine, and that you have a patient who has a given disease or a given cancer, and in the lab, they will actually take those cancer cells and apply different products to it to see which one has a better impact in reducing or destroying the cancers. This would be an example of an umbrella study in a lab setting. Basket is the opposite, is where you have just one investigational product and you're looking at various indications that it could apply for. Pharmaceutical companies use this often when they're in their initial phases, where they will develop a drug and then have to go through and say, okay, what is this drug going to be used for? And sometimes they have libraries of these investigational products that have been developed, but have not found any good applications for them. And so they keep looking to see, is this something that would work? And then a platform, in reading the literature, it's kind of a combination of both. I tend to think that that has to be done with a lot of computational tables that look at the different results of using an umbrella versus basket kind of combined. Some of the pros for using these types of study designs are they do save time and money, they do give you quicker results, but the cons are that they really require a lot of preparation, administrative methods need to be looked for, and then accounting for variations in the safety profiles and accountability. So for example, if you were looking at multiple investigational products, perhaps they all have a different method of administration. One could be an infusion, one could be an oral medication, and therefore, if you were looking at collecting AEs, you might be looking at the site of an injection or versus no site. And so how do you compare those in an equitable fashion to come up with the correct data? So again, it becomes very complicated as to how they're going to put those facts together. And then one that is a little less um, used today, but I do think that this is all what will be coming in years to come, is what they call the synthetic arm design. And this is where you're using previously collected data as a secondary data set, um, often used as a comparator study arm. I attended a lecture where they were using previously collected data from medical records to create a computer profile of a patient that could be used as a given patient's own um, undiseased partner, so to speak. And so within the computer, you would have your patient, and then you would have this data created patient that would, with time, perhaps be able to predict um, what your true patient might be experiencing. Um, it reduces your cohort size because you create these make-believe study subjects within the computers based on previous data. It does use real-world evidence or data to build these patient profiles. Um, They're a little less popular currently because of the data usage, and trying to um, figure out how to build those profiles can be quite complicated. But I do see that as we collect more and more data, um, and it's available for these types of manipulations, that you are going to see more of these types of study designs that step outside of the traditional patient is recruited, patient comes into the clinic on a certain schedule of event and has all these data points collected, and then this is all analyzed. They are going to be more creative, and this is going to create an additional um, need within clinical research for individuals who will understand these data profiles, how to manage them, and be able to understand. Because I will tell you that in reading some of these study designs and how they are put together are mind-boggling to someone who is more used to the more physical. I take a blood test, I get the results, and this is how I process. So it is a little bit like the sci-fi of what we're thinking about when we say the word artificial intelligence. So a clinical data integrity is usually can be addressed by the clinical data manager. That is the traditional concepts of what we are used to. But those data roles are changing, and there is actually a society that I took a lot of this information from that is talking about clinical data scientists. And these are the ones that are addressing the quality and validity of the data that we collect from these new and novel methods. Um, I know that there are probably more questions than I've been able to answer, but I hope that this gives you just a little bit of a hint of where clinical research is headed, utilizing these new technologies of artificial intelligence, sensors, and wearables, and how we will be able to capture the abilities of the computers and to make them work for us. But it will take a very deep understanding of what is going on in order to meet those needs. So some of the resources, and again, everybody will receive copies of the slides as I try to create them in such a way that you can use them for references in the future. Again, there is a society for clinical data managers. So if you are in one of those areas where you are dealing with more of these artificial intelligence or machine learning, they have some information that is very important. Or if you have a real interest in the data points as opposed to the conducting of the clinical visits, this might be an area you would want to look into. And then the adaptive design, I actually had to look outside of some of the things in order to come up with some of that information. But I thank you for your time today. If you do have questions, if you have answers, I have questions. But if you do have specific questions, please feel free to send me emails. Contact us. The CCTS has really been working hard in order to develop some new tools and resources for the clinical research professionals at The Ohio State University. Some of the upcoming kind of announcements is next month we'll have our training, and we will be able to return to our second Thursday of the month. As a side note to that, we are starting to work with some of the other departments who offer training to the clinical research professional population so that we can kind of coordinate and not overbook on particular trainings. Next month, because we missed a month because I was ill, we have the option of having quality by design or talking more in depth about decentralized trials and also looking at some of the monitoring needed for those. So if you want to send me an email, let me know which you would prefer. We're going to put this up to a vote. In November, November 2nd, I'll be sending out a survey, probably red cap survey, to all of those who normally attend, and just ask some questions regarding how we've done the first year of taking this on, what you would like to see as far as in the future, topics that you would like to hear more on. I've noticed that as we move this into a virtual world, that the attendance has greatly increased, making it more difficult to have some of those conversations. So perhaps in addition to these webinar type of series on the second Thursdays of the month, would you be interested in having specific workshops that are limited at 25 to be able to delve more into some of these topics and to be able to ask questions or learn methods of doing particular items. So it'll be addressing things like that, and more particularly what areas you need help with. And then in December, our series will be talking about career development within the clinical research profession. And we have a guest speaker, Dr. Carolyn Jones, who is head of the Masters of Clinical Research here at Ohio State, which is a completely online master's degree. And she'll talk maybe about the master's, but more importantly, how the career is being developed and the efforts to make it more of a recognized profession in order to have career development and things like that. So with that, I think that is what I have for today. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at any time. I do try to answer within the 24 hours. Sometimes that means I'm up late, but that's okay. I do enjoy answering the questions. Or if you're needing a resource and you can't find the resource, I'm also very interested in helping you find those resources. We have a lot of things that we are hoping to be able to roll out at the first of the year. those were things that I kind of wanted to rule out or roll out this fall, but it is the year of 2020 being COVID, and that has altered a lot of our plans. So I ask that you all stay healthy, wear your mask, wash your hands, and more importantly, just stay healthy and stay safe. So with that, we will conclude today's meeting. If you've noticed, we're a little bit early, and that is also by design, in that those of us who are in these Zoom meetings day in, day out, uh, hour to hour, we're finding that if we can end a little bit early, allowing those individuals time to transition to the next Zoom meeting, stand up and move between meetings, and then, of course, the necessary um, bathroom breaks and water, and again, just moving. So I look forward to hearing from you, comments, suggestions, and we'll look forward to getting those emails, whether you want quality by design next month or decentralized trials. Presenting one of them next month does not mean that I will not present the other in the near future. It's just for what we need to pick for next month. And with that, I will say thank you and have a great day. I think the sun is going to shine today, so get out and get some vitamin D. Thank you, everyone.